Hey, what is happening, people? Woodsy Workout here, and today we are talking how to fuel for Hyrox training and competition with a professional nutritionalist. So last week I had an appointment with Steve Grant. He's a leading nutritionalist and functional medicine practitioner, and he's worked with actors and professional athletes to get them in shape for their profession. And we've started working together as I'm now part of the P-Form team, which I'll get into a little bit later, but he's already given me some great insight into how myself and others can improve for Hyrox and similar fitness competitions. The first thing we did was take body composition measurements with a very accurate bioelectrical impedance analyzer. And this basically measures your body fat percentage, muscle, water, and a few other things. And Steve kind of talks me through my results, and then we get into all the different things that can influence your training and your performance.
So at the moment, body fat percentage for you is coming in at 7.1%.
Okay.
Fat mass at 6.25 kilos. So obviously body fat percentage anyway is going to be influenced by muscle tissue levels, water levels, that sort of thing as well. So when you're looking at kind of like norms or ideals for body fat percentage, it's very much going to be dictated by, okay, well, how much muscle tissue does someone have?
Yeah.
Like if someone's like 7.1% body fat, but has very little muscle tissue, actually their fat mass is probably going to be
Really
too low.
Yeah.
Like, so that's why you get this here, which is your fat mass index. So your fat mass index looks at the amount of fat in your body in kilos divided by your height squared. And this is where you've got more established kind of like low, as in not good low, so health consequences as a result of body fat being too low. So for males, that you might start to see kind of a deterioration of someone's testosterone levels, that sort of thing, when they're pushing it a little bit too far in terms of the body fat, or at least holding it down there for too long, basically. You can dip into that, but you don't want to be holding body fat levels in kind of very, very low ranges. For most people with a reasonable amount of muscle mass, that's probably starting to get to sort of like sub 6, sub 5% body fat, not holding around that. You might peak there, but you will come back up to sort of slightly higher ranges anyway. So little bit to play with fat mass, but actually at the moment, like you're in really quite good shape from a fat percentage point of view and from a fat mass total perspective as well. So visceral fat is kind of not really picking up on any visceral fat, which is to be expected when your body fat level is already low, the type of training that you do, all of that sort of stuff anyway. And this one's just waist circumference here, which we don't pay too much attention to. So yeah, then we look at your muscle mass. So what you've got here is kind of age and gender specific range. So 95% of the population, your age, your gender, are going to fit between this range of 29.7 kilos of muscle up to 39.1 kilos. So you're in that top sort of 2.5% basically, because you're coming in at 39.9 kilos of muscle tissue. Somewhat expected given your training and an athlete, like we're kind of expecting to be up around there.
Now, to give you some context, this was measured 2 weeks prior to Hyrox World Championships. I normally sit around 89 kilos and about 10% body fat. But 3 weeks prior to that, I've kind of made a conscious effort to tighten up my diet, and I was also doing a lot more volume of exercise. So I was quite happy for that to come down a couple kilos and bring my body fat percentage to around 7%. Which, like Steve said, not necessarily a place to stay, but it means you've got a good power to weight ratio for racing. What was really useful to me was when and how to manipulate your calorie and macro intake depending on your competition calendar, and then how that changes for each training phase and your goals on each training phase.
So I would probably say as you're getting leaner, then probably, this sort of like 3,500 to 4,000 as a deficit, but still trying to maintain performance is probably the range that you want to go in at. Once you kind of go, now off season is going to be how much you change your training at that point as to how much you're going to adapt these numbers. Because if the training drops down quite a bit, you don't then suddenly want to go, training drops down and boom, I'm going up here with the calories as well at the same time. Because then you're just getting like a double whammy. So you may even find that if training's going to be the variable that you're going to work on, you're going to go, okay, volume of training is going to drop by, say, 30% on what it would be normally, you may not need to adjust your numbers that much from a food perspective. You might just keep them the same, and you use the training as the variable to kind of bring you back into maintenance or a kind of subtle surplus instead. Equally, if you were at some point I'm assuming your training's going to drop down when you go off season anyway, but there may be a phase where you're then bringing your training load up, but actually your goal is still more performance, maybe maintaining or increasing muscle mass or strength or whatever it might be, that you still don't want to work in a deficit. So at that point, you're then starting to look at going 4, 5, like that sort of range for then. And then when you want to lean in again, you then might drop into this sort of range again, short term, just to kind of get a bit leaner going into competition, but without sacrificing performance. So I'd probably go in around 175, 200 grams of protein, so 1.8, 2.4 grams per kilo of body weight. Now carbohydrates are your next most important one, because that's getting the carbohydrate levels right is what's going to allow you to maximize performance, even if you're going into a deficit.
Right.
So a lot of the time people will sacrifice carbohydrates as part of their way of bringing their calorie level down, but then their performance will kind of drag as a result of doing that. So for you, where you're really trying to prioritize performance, you still want to maintain a good level of carbohydrate, even in a calorie deficit. So your variable that's going to shift a little bit more is going to be fats.
Right.
When you're trying to get leaner.
Okay.
Because you're kind of going, right, okay, let's say example, you as maintenance you go up to like 4,500. Okay. And then when you do want to kind of lean up a little bit, you drop into sort of like say 3,800, something like that. I would make the majority of that change from fats, and not sacrifice protein or carbohydrate as a result, because you wanted to refuel, you wanted to get that glycogen reserve back up before the training session. If someone's stripping out the carbohydrate to try and get leaner,
going to be flat.
Then they're going to be flat for their training session. Their performance is going to drop out instead.
Yeah,
so
really
that's the way that I would kind of tweak it more than anything. Is like for you maintaining protein, and actually for you maintaining carbohydrate is super important.
Yeah.
Because that way we maintain performance. Your variable that you play with is fats more than anything, as to whether you're going to bring yourself back into maintenance, or surplus even, or back down into like some sort of deficit to then try and lean up a little bit.
Right.
But definitely at the moment, like 7.1% kind of going into the event in a couple of weeks.
Can't be much.
Exactly. Like you're pretty much around where you'd want to be for that.
Good.
So I think you've probably already got somewhat of a formula already. Like you said, you're probably around 3,800 already, which I think with your training you do is a subtle enough deficit to get you a bit leaner, but not so like extreme that it's going to kind of sacrifice performance basically. So like what I would try and do over the next sort of like 6 to 12 months is just kind of try and establish where numbers might need to be based upon what the goal is at that time. I would say you're coming out of like a little bit of a leaning up phase going into competition. Off-season training volume is going to drop down. And you may keep your food similar to what you're currently doing at the moment. And then you're probably going to go into a phase where you're going to start ramping training up again, and that's when we want to ramp the food up with that as well, and not just kind of stay lean the whole time. So even if you're putting on a little bit of body fat during your off season, and then at other points, you can then kind of come back in and sort of get a little bit leaner later on as well. Does that?
Yeah, that makes good sense. Yes. If I'm starting to prioritize different types of training more, so for example, if I'm doing more strength training, or I'm doing a block, or I'm doing more aerobic training, should that make a change depending on like
it might vary your carbohydrate like levels a little bit, and it might vary your calorie levels a little bit as well, right? Like so it's kind of knowing like roughly how much am I actually utilizing here between different sort of energy, between different training sessions, as to how you might adapt it. Like if you're suddenly starting to really ramp up a lot of the cardio you're doing, and you're just burning through a lot more calories, you're just going to have to account for that. But you're just burning through a lot more calories, and maybe you're not burning through as much glycogen if you're kind of doing a lot more like running based stuff, like longer steadier sort of stuff. So it might just be a matter of getting more calories in, and then you can just kind of go, right, I need to hit this calorie level,
Yeah.
I need to hit this protein level, but I don't need to give too much of a shit about how I balance carbohydrates and fats. I can be a bit more relaxed about that then. Whereas if you're doing a type of training which is very glycogen demanding, then you really emphasize getting your carbohydrate levels back up to make sure that you're replenishing there. You can get to a point where you overthink this a bit too much as well. You know, like I think you want to look at your kind of key performance indicators, like you know, how do I feel? What's my performance like in the gym? What's my body composition telling me? And then kind of just make little adaptations from there without kind of going, oh, I've got 10 grams too much fat. And, you know, it becomes a little bit too like overanalyzed if you start getting like that. So it's almost being accepted that actually in off season you're going to gain a little bit during that time, and that's fine. And actually, from a hormonal perspective, that's a good thing to just kind of get the body from 7% body fat maybe up to sort of 8, 9, 10% body fat, and just hold a little higher for a little bit of time. Focus on other things that you can work on, and then you can kind of pull it back in. And then maybe the next time you're going into a comp, you're dipping in at like 6% body fat or something like that instead. But you're dipping in. I think that's the key thing. Trying to maintain those very low body fat levels are just unnecessary, and probably they won't work in your favour over a sustained period of time.
So, because I have been sort of self-managing, like coming into a bit of a deficit to get to this point, like this seems like I'm in a really good position for competition. I've still got a couple of weeks, and now I really want to prioritise just performance. So should I be now coming back? Like,
I mean, I would look at this similar way I look at other sports, where like as you're coming into competition day, I'm assuming volume of training is going to sort of drop down a little bit. Right?
So this week is probably going to be my biggest week, and then I'll taper down next week.
So what you can fundamentally do is you can actually get away with not changing much of your nutrition, because as you taper down your training that final week, you're naturally bringing your glycogen levels back up. So there's not really a need to do the whole sort of like carbo loading type approach, because as training kind of does this, and you're keeping your food there, glycogen levels are kind of coming back into where they need to be. And then what you're not doing is you're then not kind of doing something crazy like the night before and just kind of eating tons and tons of stuff. And then actually the next day feeling quite water retentive and heavy and sort of not really functioning that well. And you're not doing anything kind of abnormal that you've not done with your diet before as well. Like anytime you're going into comp days and comp prep, everything wants to be familiar. Everything, you don't want to be trying new stuff just before, because that's when people, you know, struggle with their guts or struggle with like something else that's going on. So for most people, I would use the deload of training as knowing that you've got like a good amount of carbohydrate coming in already. The deload of training will allow the glycogen reserves to get back up. That's all you need to worry about doing. You might hold maybe a little bit higher in weight on competition day, just because you're fully glycogen loaded and you're ready to go. What do you do in terms of like nutrition on the day?
It really depends on what time I'm racing, because if it's a lunchtime race, I'll just have my normal breakfast, which tend to be like oats, and I tend to just pull protein and fats out on the day.
To keep it easier on the gut.
Just like easier digestion. So normally I have oats with a bit of protein powder in. I'll just take the protein powder out, and then like cereal bars and snack food up until lunchtime. It's a bit trickier like when it's like an evening race, because I'm sort of aware that I don't digest very well on the day, just like nerves and stuff. So I try and make sure I have a big meal the night before, and then I'll probably still have last time I had oats in the morning, eggs on toast at lunch, and then I wasn't competing until like 8 o'clock, and I didn't have anything. I basically just had like rice cakes, cereal bars, gels. But then I was good competing. As soon as I finished, like my stomach was a bit upset, and I couldn't eat very well afterwards. That took a bit of like kind of coming back around from. So I didn't know whether there was, and also it'd be good to get your opinion on, like, should I be trying to take fuel during?
I think that was an interesting thing for me, like going to Hyrox events and sort of watching, like not really anyone is actually focused on any kind of intra competition sort of fuel. And I know obviously the intensity is like really high while you're doing it as well, so you're having to be sort of mindful about what you can and what your gut's able to handle. And also to some degree you have to train with kind of what you're going to do on competition day, so that your gut is really used to it. Because also on competition day, like you say, the nerves are also going to kind of contribute a little bit to that as well. But I definitely think there's like people are missing the trick if they're not doing some sort of fueling during, because it's such glycogen depleting work. Like that's the reality. So there should be, you know, if there are certain kind of parts of like the Hyrox events where actually you feel you're working at a slightly lower intensity compared to others.
So there's,
you kind of select out that and go, this is the moment that I might be able to get something in, and my gut's more likely to kind of tolerate it.
That tends to be what I do. Like, so I'll take a gel after the row. On the row, I feel I can bring my heart rate down a little bit, just sitting down, and then I'll take that just before I start running. And that tends to be probably 40 minutes into the race. But that and I've practiced taking that and in training, and that tends to be alright. I don't know, like I haven't tried taking any more than that. But I don't know whether I could or whether that would be beneficial.
Like general rule of thumb is going to be sort of somewhere around about 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrate per hour. But this is obviously person dependent and how intense they're working and stuff like that. So you've got to really think about timing of what you're going to do. Now, what you'd often do, most gels are usually about 20 grams, 25 grams, something like that. You'd start low and kind of see how you get along with that, and then see if you can tolerate slightly more. If you could, there probably would be some benefit just to kind of bump it up a little bit more, just because of how glycogen demanding Hyrox events are. You know, so I think there's potentially something in there, like, you know, electrolyte based sort of like gels that you can kind of bring in and time at certain points while you're doing it. I think kind of before the event, it's trying to get that balance of like having fairly kind of like normal-ish meals, so still having some sort of form of like decent quality protein with carbohydrates, that sort of thing. You're naturally going to want to keep fiber levels relatively low that day anyway. But you know, if you're doing something in the evening, you're probably going to want to have relatively normal meals like earlier in the day, because the earlier you start bringing in things like cereal bars and like all of that sort of stuff, the more chance you're going to sort of upset the gut as well. So I would be sort of, you know, trying to bring those things in
a little later.
A little later, and then try and keep the meals as sort of like, you know, like things like white rice and fish or eggs or something like that. So fairly kind of like plain, easy to digest meals, like with some oils and that sort of thing in there as well. Maybe a little bit of fruit, but like probably like, you know, less fleshy fruits and stuff like mango, like that sort of thing could work quite well during. And then obviously as you get a bit closer, you're looking maybe slightly more faster acting. It's not going to hang around in the gut too long, and then you could look at that sort of the 1 or 2 hours before, and then kind of go into the event, and then possibly refuel a little bit during. But you know, like fundamentally, the event is, you know, how long does it take you to get around?
About 70 minutes.
About 70 minutes. So like, you know, if you just eaten and fueled well and your glycogen reserves are pretty well topped up, you don't need to do anything too crazy going into just beforehand, because you're already there. You know, like, and you're not doing anything that day that's going to really deplete your glycogen. So you shouldn't need to do a lot of like kind of like carbo loading sort of stuff and things that are actually more likely to upset the gut just beforehand. I would just be like trying to keep it as plain and simple and like lowish on the fiber, fats that are really easy to digest, proteins that are easy to digest. Do that as much as you can, and then maybe really focus on the fueling during, because that's the point that you're going to start to see your glycogen start coming down, and that's where I think that a lot of people will be hitting walls like when they're doing a Hyrox event, because they're just so depleted going into it.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's really interesting. With hydration, would that change a lot? I tend to make sure I'm drinking a lot throughout that week.
Yeah.
And then I don't like to be full like just before racing.
Yeah.
So I don't know, and I'm not sure. Like I tend to find it difficult to drink during, or at least it slows me down if I do have to. So is that always going to be beneficial? Can you get away with not doing it?
I don't like, because the body's very good at adapting to fluid intake. So if you just increase the amount of water that you have, like the week before, your body becomes quite efficient at peeing out extra water it doesn't need. So it's actually more about just being super consistent, with your fluid intake, and that goes for like normal training days, then going into sort of the week leading up into competition as well. Yeah, if you start ramping it up in the week before, you're probably just going to find you're going to be peeing a bit more, and then the body's getting used to that high level of water. And then if that's not coming in that day, it's a little bit like, so this is kind of a random one, but like if someone's ever doing like water and glycogen manipulation to look as lean as possible on stage, or randomly like what we've done for like actors for like prisoner of war movies where we're looking to really deplete them. You're bringing their water intake up, and then you're pulling their water out, and the body's still peeing out at the same rate, but now the same amount of water is not coming in. So I'd probably say, if anything, the risk is that you push your water intake up before competition day, and then on the day you're not drinking very much, but you're still peeing out the same rate. You put yourself more at risk of hydration by doing that. So I'd be more just like trying to keep water levels as consistent as possible, whether it's competition week, whether it's just a normal training week. Just keep it around the same sort of level, and the body builds that efficiency with how it's going to manage fluid balance. With that, the main thing is just to maintain your electrolytes and sort of small amounts of water to sort of hold on to that, because you're going to be sweating like a pig basically when you're doing it. So I think it's just making sure you're doing that sort of thing.
That's really good.
That's like like with are you using People Active at the moment?
Yeah, so I've been using. I use that. Kind of before my longer sessions. And then I'll have like just another electrolyte during, just in my water during, and then a gel if it's like around the 40-minute mark. Sort of thing.
So I think that combo works pretty well. And then actually, if anything, I would be like, trying not to overthink, trying to do too much stuff like in that week. Like you don't need to be doing like a super special diet. You don't need to be sort of doing too much with your water. You want to be trying to create some consistency with those things, so that then you're going into sort of like race day, like ready to go. The tweaks are going to be what you do kind of
training wise,
probably during training, and getting your fuel in right during training, so that then gets transferred over into during event, like what you're going to do during that event as well. So if you're used to kind of utilizing something like P4 active pre-training to help with blood flow and to help with like muscular endurance, like that sort of thing, then you transfer that over into race day. Like you say, electrolytes, gels at certain points, like that sort of thing. You're just trying to transfer over these kind of things that you've done during training over onto race day instead. That would be my kind of advice for it, really.
Cool. Okay. A lot of people's concern is I need to lose weight to do better, and then my concern is the intensity of the training is quite high, and I don't want them to be a calorie deficit and the high intensity training just to kind of crash out. So when would kind of be a good time to focus on like body composition, and then when to switch over to performance, or is it kind of just balancing the two?
This is where sometimes you can look at what macronutrients do I need to switch around in this person based upon what their goals are.
Yeah.
And actually, if you're trying to really look after performance, then you don't want the macronutrient you're sacrificing to necessarily be carbohydrate, right?
Right.
So you might still be trying to get them in a deficit, not too much of a deficit, but it's too aggressive. They're just going to kind of crash.
Yeah.
And also not too much of a deficit. If you are using fat as the variable, there's not enough fat to support health as well.
Yeah.
Like that's the kind of balance that you've got to try and strike. If you're going to go, right, I'm going to put you in a deficit, but we need to maintain this amount of protein and this amount of carbohydrate, and then the fat's right down here, they're going to feel like shit anyway. And they're not going to function very well from a health perspective. So the deficit needs to be more subtle. And I'd focus more on fat as the variable that I would move around, because the type of work that you're doing is so glycogen demanding. So that would be how I would kind of play with it. You can push people into a deficit and you can get people to drop body fat while still maintaining performance. But what you also probably want to do is just like not be constantly in a deficit. It's like, you want to do a phase where you're maybe focusing on being able to drop a bit of body fat, but then also you want to do some phases where you bring it back into kind of a maintenance or subtle sort of surplus level, so that their body's just not getting used to kind of being in this sort of constant 500, 750 calorie a day deficit over months and months on end, because then you're just going to get some level of kind of adaptation to that sort of caloric change, basically. But like I think have phases where you focus on kind of trying to like influence their body composition, but if you're prioritizing performance as you're doing that, use fat as a variable that you're going to play around with a bit more than carbohydrate, and then see how that person kind of gets on with that.
And how long would those phases be? Like a month, 2 months?
Like probably like up to a few months. I think up to a few months would be fine, and then I'd probably be looking at sort of like just going, okay, cool, we're going to adapt things around a little bit, relax a little bit. Let's sort of hold you where you are for now, and then we can also revisit this. Depends how long someone's journey is, right? And
a lot of the time they've kind of got races or events throughout the calendar. So you can kind of, it flows with that sort of thing. So we can kind of go, right, after this race, you can get back into surplus for a bit.
Exactly. So almost like mini off seasons, and then kind of go into that next phases after that. And it might be those kind of like mini off season. Then you might be focusing a bit more on like it depends if you want to push composition away from the event, or if you want to go into the event kind of gradually getting someone a bit leaner. I don't think it would matter too much which way you did it, to be honest with you. You're going to want someone to kind of come in a bit leaner anyway, so I'd probably do that. I'd probably do like bit of an off season, then maybe a bit of work where it's going to be more sort of strength based and kind of making sure they're well fueled. And then you might kind of dip in and sort of get someone a bit leaner going into the competition, so you're trying to maintain that kind of focus on that kind of weight to power ratio. Do competition, off again, and then rinse and
that's kind of how I've been sort of thinking of it. So that's good to reassuring. Cool. Thank you very much. That was all good.
Okay, so hopefully you found that useful. I'll be continuing to work with Steve and the P-Form team next season. Steve has helped to formulate the P-Form supplements. I've been using the P-Form Active one in particular, as we mentioned. It's really beneficial in increasing blood flow and sustaining performance. So if you are interested in those, you can find a link in the description along with a discount code. If you are interested in a Hyrox plan, you can visit my website at coactiveperformance.com or follow me on Instagram at Woodsy Workout, where you can find plenty more tips and tricks on all things health and fitness. Until next time, peace.